Hello friends, and welcome to the Woodworker's Journey. In today's video, we're going to be making this Hershey's Kiss Tree for Valentine's Day. Before we get started, I hope you'll indulge me for about 30 seconds or so while I tell you a bit about myself on this channel. My name is Andy Cotterill. I've fairly recently retired from the Royal Canadian Navy, where I served for almost 30 years. And since that time, I've become like a lot of you, and I've absolutely fallen in love with woodworking. So being a bit of a natural instructor and teacher from my time in the military, I thought I'd create this video series, The Woodworker's Journey, to follow myself along in this project and future projects to see how I progress from where I'm now, which is really green but keen, to where I'm going to end up in the future, which is hopefully somewhat of a bit of a not too bad, not too shabby woodworker. I got the idea for this project. It's called the Kissmas Tree by a man named Richmond from Woodcraft Magazine from the December 2020, January 2021 issue. It was supposed to be for Christmas. However, I was a little bit late to that game, so I made this for my stepdaughter Olivia and my wife Christy for Valentine's Day instead. I hope you enjoy it. You're certainly going to see me make some mistakes, so I hope you can appreciate them so you don't have to make the same ones. And if you like anything you see or don't like anything you see and you feel like commenting, please, I encourage you, let me know what you think of the video. Thank you. Starting off the project, I'm taking my stock, which is hard maple, and I'm lifting up the table saw blade till just over the top of the piece of wood. You don't want it too high. Apparently this is the best way for getting a good cut on a piece of wood. Next, I'm going to take my my square, and just make sure that the saw blade is perpendicular. I'm taking my hard maple, which I got a whole bunch for a super good deal from a local luthier, and I'm measuring it out to 12.5 inches. The final piece is supposed to be 12 inches. I've read and heard a lot of advice that you always cut your stock a little bit extra long, and you can fit it to length later, because you can't add wood on, but you can take it off. And my first mistake of the project, very early on, you can see the blade didn't go all the way through, so I'm sitting there kind of almost like a little bit of paralysis for a moment. I figure out what to do. I could have rotated the piece, but I just lifted up the blade a smidge. I'm going to make the rest of the cuts. And the last piece, flip it over, because it's only a few inches to cut off instead of having a whole 12 inches dangling on the far side of the blade. Next, I take my benchtop jointer outside, and it's resting on top of my table saw. The table saw, one of the corners is sitting on a piece of ice because it's winter time, so it rocks just a little bit, but it's not too bad. I flatten one face, and then I take that face and put it against the fence to flatten an adjacent edge. So now I've got two 90-degree edges that are both flat and square to each other. This will allow me to put that corner against the table saw fence and cut the rest of the pieces square. You can see I'm just taking my square and just making sure there's no gaps. Once again, I'm lifting up the table saw blade, just measuring the height of my wood pieces. And I'm going to take my tape measure, and the pieces are meant to be 1 1/8 wide ultimately, but I've got the table saw blade set to just under 1.5 inches, and I can make it smaller later if I choose to. I ended up not making it smaller, but that was the idea. So I'm going to be cutting all the pieces, and you'll see here, this is the first time, even though I didn't feel like I was really in danger when I was making the cuts, watching it now, it's just a little cringe-worthy watching how close my fingers are to the blade, and I'm more nervous now than I was at the time. That's probably a bad thing, and it's probably how accidents happen. You see the piece that's being cut is diverting slightly from the fence, so that's how kickbacks happen. So I'll talk more about that later on in the video. Now I've amended my ways, and I've gotten a second little push stick, an impromptu push stick I just made from a piece of wood, which I'm using to move the cut piece, and I have the yellow plastic push guide, just making sure that that piece stays close to the fence. Now I've got all my pieces to a consistent width, and now I can cut them, turn them on their side, and cut them into 1/2 inch strips, which is the ultimate height of each slat in the tree. And once again, it's just slightly over 1/2 inch. That gives me some wiggle room to do some sanding or to make it a little bit narrower later on. And you can see I'm encountering an issue there where I had to change my push sticks because the yellow one would not have fit between the blade and the fence. Now you'll see right here, this was the first real major safety issue that I noticed. My elbow or my forearm nudged that stack of wood. I was aware of it when it was happening, but had it been different and I was caught by surprise, then maybe that would have caused me to move my hand and possibly into the saw blade. So here you see me, I'm contemplating for a brief second keeping going, but I decided no, you just need to pause, get everything out of the way, clear it, and start again. It's really easy just to keep on going and doing something. It's human nature, I think, to keep on pushing your luck, but I decided I don't want to do that. I really should have an outfeed table. An outfeed table would allow the wood to keep sliding off the table saw top onto another surface of an equal height. Now I've got all my pieces. The plans called for 30 slats to make up the tree, but I made I think 34, 35, just to have a couple extra to practice on and do some tests on later on, which you'll see. Now, it turns out that something as simple as sanding isn't as simple as somebody might think if you didn't do it. A lot of you are probably going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but I had to find the way that was right for me to sand all these pieces. So there's a lot of them, and I've got my random orbital sander, and it's taking a long time, quite a bit. I sped this up, and you're not seeing all of it, but I quickly realized that there's probably an easier way and a faster way, and that would be to, my idea at the time was to put a whole bunch together on the table and sand them all at once. But right here, I realized that because these were 12.5 inches long and they need to be 12 inches long, I still had to cut them off at the miter saw, which you'll see here. And I've got them set up there with a stop block on the left, which allows me to put each piece into place and cut off that last ½ inch. So I didn't want to sand and then cut and then sand again, so I made all the cuts now, and you'll see a super fast motion right now when I'm cutting all of them in just a couple seconds. Once they're cut, then I can sand them all. And so that removes an extra step that would have been unnecessary. So you'll see there's a whole bunch of burn marks on it from different parts of the milling process. So this is my genius idea that wasn't so genius after all, to sand them all at once, and it was just really sloppy. They were sliding all over the place. That's a non-stick mat, but it's cold outside, and my table saw is you know, the metal's cold, and so it's just slipping. So I broke out my MVP for this project, and that is my rigid oscillating sander. This retails at Home Depot Canada for $250 regularly. However, I waited and I got it for $200, and it's just such a terrific tool. There you'll see I have something in my hand. It's called crepe. It's almost like a big eraser, and when the wood gets all compacted inside the sandpaper, you just put the crepe on it and it cleans it right up. Now I've got the slats together, and I have to find the center line, so I'll know where to drill my 1/4 inch threaded rod. So first thing I'll do is I'll take the base piece where the first hole is going to go through, measure the 12 inches, half of that is 6, find my mark, and then I have to, I'm going to put a straight edge on there and just make sure that's perfectly straight. And then I have to find the middle the other direction, so I'm going to break out this little handy jig I got off Amazon. I'll put a link down below if you want to check it out. And you put a pencil through it. It's a center finding jig. So you put those 2 little pegs, and you twist it so the pencil will be in the middle. You slide it, and voila! You have found the center of a piece of wood. X marks the spot. Now I'm taking my combination square just to make sure that the sides are equal, because I didn't want to make a mistake on the first one and have that carry through all through the project. So I'm at my drill press, and I have a piece of plywood there to stop the drill bit from causing a tear out underneath the wooden piece. So the first one I did, I just put a 1/4 inch hole using a 1/4 inch brad point bit, and it works. So now I I don't think I showed it, but I did all the rest of the slats. Yep, and now what I'm doing is I'm getting ready to make a larger hole for the barbed T-nut, which will secure the threaded rod. So I'm taking I think it was a 5/16 through hole, so the circular part of the T-nut can fit through. Yes, it does. And now I need to do a counter bore so the base can fit inside. The plans called for a 7/8 counter bore, and this is what I did here. But you'll see it's a little bit larger than what I wanted. So I put the T-nut in there, and there's a lot of wiggle room. So I switch it out instead, and I put in a 3/4 inch Forstner bit, and I did another test cut. And this is just a test piece, by the way, so it doesn't matter. I'm not going to use it again. And you'll see the T-nut fits nicely inside. There you go. I realized afterwards why they called for a 7/8 Forstner bit, and I'll tell you that when it happens. And there, I made it on the actual piece, and you'll see it fits right inside. And I didn't capture it on camera, but I took a hammer and just gave it a couple light whacks to put that T-nut into the base. And there you see it in there, flush trim with the bottom piece. Now I'm threading that onto the whole thing, and I realized, good thing I double checked before I went any further. The plans call for, like I mentioned earlier on, 30 slats. However, I had, I think, 32 in there, just because of the extras. So good thing I checked. So I removed those last two. And then I've got a metal cutoff wheel. So the threaded rod was long enough. When I cut it right in half, I can use the other half for another tree. So it fits for two. And here's where I'm taking off the two extra pieces. So now I've got 30 in there, just like the plans called for. And I'm just using a second T-nut to tighten it down to keep it all together. So the shortest length of a tree branch is going to be 3.5 inches long. So I find my center point, and then I take half of 3.5, which is 1 3/4 each side. You'll see there. And then I draw lines down to the corners of the bottom pieces. And this, I'd never used it before, except I actually used it for my hardwood floors in my old condo years and years ago. It's just an angle finder. So I was trying to think of how to figure out the angles on the saw blade, and I broke this out, but I realized after using it for a quick couple seconds that I should really extend the metal, because the longer that reference edge is, the better chance it'll show me if I'm on the right spot. So I lock that into place, and then you can turn that over and just make sure the other side is the same. And then I had to figure out how I'm going to use that reference to actually set the wood into position so that the blade will cut right down that line. So what I figured out was to put the angle finder against the saw blade, and then I flipped it once, and then flipped it a second time, and then put it against the blade. So now I can use the angle finder to reference the miter gauge. I can slide it up. This project really revealed to me the limitations of the miter gauge I have that came with my table saw. It was pretty poor. So here you can see I get the piece ready in position, and I see that the metal rod is far too long, so I take a pause. I get my angle grinder with a metal cutoff wheel. I just trim that up. And now I put the piece into position, and I slowly slide it up. And you'll see that I'm pausing for a moment. There's a snag because the miter gauge, the handle that's used to lock it down, protrudes from the bottom, and it caught on the edge of my table saw, so I had to lift the whole thing up. It's not my favorite thing to do, and I need to find a way to do that better in the future. I think a table sled would have been great. I could have figured out a way to put a physical angle in there to cut the piece. So I backed off a few times as well because the angle was not keeping. The miter gauge was moving, so the saw blade would come off the line, and that wasn't ideal. I realized afterward that it would have been fine because I ended up doing that on the far side. You'll see when that happens in just a second, and the solution I came up with it. So finally, you'll see I get through the whole cut. I think this is the clip where I do it. Great success. Now I flip the piece over, you see I've already started the cut, and this time when the angle was going off and the blade was coming off the line, off the pencil mark, I didn't worry about it, I just let it go, and you'll see my solution in just a second. Once again, the VIP, my rigid oscillating sander, I just sanded down to the line. So you see that in a lot of projects. I've seen a lot of people do that before. I should have thought of it, but I guess hindsight 2020. So there I go. This is a really effective way. And plus it just made sure all the other pieces of wood were even. Now sanding, here we go, my nemesis. I held the tree up on its edge to sand and it was all over the place, so I turned on its side and this worked a lot better. I could just sort of hold it down with my arm on the table saw. The table saw was my main work surface for this project. And I've got a huge workbench that I'm building, but it's not ready yet. You can see it's there on the bottom. Now here's a part, it might look a little bit dangerous, but it's really not, I don't think. I'm putting a little bit of a round over on each slat. That's not in the plans, it's just something I did myself, but it's just a 1/4 inch round over, and it's just barely, the blade is barely coming up over the top of the plastic base of the router, of the palm router, so it wasn't really that dangerous. But I do want to get a router table. Now here we see the base piece I have with the T-nut inside. And it's hard to see there because of the pencil marks didn't show, but I had a left and a right marked, and this is where I cut off the little legs, the support legs, which will be glued back onto the above piece later on. And you'll see I've got a piece of wood in between the saw blade and the table saw, and this allows me to butt the piece of wood up to the block, I guess. And that way when I make the cut, that small little piece is not stuck tightly in between the blade and the fence. Now here's where I made another mistake. You'll see 2.5 by 1.5. And this is where I'm going to I make the little counter bores for the actual Kisses, the Hershey's Kisses. So you do the long edge of the block, the 2.5 inches there. And then when that's done, you turn it 90 degrees to the 1.5 inch. Now I hope you wrote that down in pencil, not in pen. You'll see in a moment why. And then finally you remove the actual whole block. And now you should have 3 holes equidistant from each other, which is pleasing to the eye and lets you put your Hershey's Kisses, but you'll see they're not really even. 2 are beside each other, and there was a larger gap for the 3rd one. So I realized what I did wrong is I didn't read carefully enough. It's 1.25 inches. So I made a smaller stop block. And here you'll see my upper arm, which makes a recurring appearance here whenever I'm at the drill press. Something I definitely need to work on. So 2.5, 1.25, and I don't have a depth stop on my drill press. Well, I think I kind of do, but I couldn't figure out how to work it, so I need to take a look at that. And I take out the piece of wood completely, and now you'll see all 3 of them. Look how nice that looks. Same width apart. So off camera I did the rest of them, and now you'll see at some point you'll have to figure that out on your own. It goes down to just 2 holes, or I guess 2 counter bores per piece on each side, because once you get to the narrower strips on the top of the tree, there you go. Now here's where I made another mistake, surprise, surprise, and I was, oh, not quite yet, sorry. So I'm gluing the legs onto the second from the bottom piece. And I contemplated cutting this out and not even including it in the video just because it looks really, I'm fumble figured and I'm dropping stuff and it's all over the place and I didn't want to look stupid in front of all the viewers, but I realized, come on, this is my first time. You know, all those other videos you watch, I'm sure they do a lot of editing. I don't want to cut out the stuff yet because I want to give anybody else out there hope that, if they're fumble fingered like I am, that it's okay. I know I'm going to get better and it'll be easier and I'll make it look better at some point in the future. But right now, I just want to include everything for transparency. So with the wood glue, it's inside my home. My shop's not heated, so I did this inside. And I wasn't really sure how long it would take. You hear different amounts of time for wood glue to set. But this was really dry to move within 5 minutes. It was just, maybe it's because it was so hot in my home. It's winter time right now. So I'm gluing those end pieces on, then putting those Irwin quick clamps. Those Irwin quick clamps are worth their weight in gold. They're just so handy and so versatile for so many projects. Now, the centerpiece, which is the actual bottom piece of the whole project, it doesn't turn right now because it's tightly held in by those end pieces. So if I did this project again, I would have made that a little bit shorter to allow it to rotate freely from the end pieces. But if I do another one for Christmas this time, that's what I'll do. I got this from Lee Valley, and aniline dye is very potent. I made a mistake here. I didn't read the instructions until that night. That's the evening you're looking at. And the instructions told me to wet the wood to raise the grain so I could sand it, which will help for a smoother finish, but I didn't realize that. So I'm actually using warm water right now that I was going to use for the dye. Now it's the next day. The wood is dried. I'm sanding it just to give it make it a lot smoother. And now it's the next day and I'm dipping them in the aniline dye. The smaller pieces I can just dip. The larger pieces, once I get to them, I'll use that foam brush. Can you guess what it is yet?
It's red.
Yeah.
I don't think I want something red.
Well, it's too late now. Now it's the next day. I've actually done a second coat of the dye once it dried, and I'm putting the tree together. It's looking good. You'll see right there how the base kind of works. That second from bottom piece kind of pivots in between the two leg extensions and the bottom piece. It makes it pretty stable, actually. Even when it's all in line like that, it's stable. So I'm putting the finial on top, and there's a little bit of a gap. It doesn't go all the way down, so I need to trim the top of that threaded rod just a little bit. So I'm just making a mark with a marker, taking a few pieces off so I don't damage them by accident. And then this time, for whatever reason, I didn't want to be bothered with the angle grinder and the metal cutoff wheel. So you'll see it sped up. It still took a long time. Well, a long time. It was like 2 minutes with a hacksaw. So I could have done it faster, but it didn't really hurt anything. Now I've got it all put together. The finial's loosened slightly to allow the wood pieces to rotate. When the finial is tight, everything's compressed and it really holds it in place really well. Now, I think $3.50 worth of Hershey's Kisses from the Bulk Barn in Canada. Bulk Barn represent. And here we have the finished project inside the home. Looking pretty dandy, if I do say so myself. And we're done. I hope you enjoyed watching the video as much as I enjoyed making it. Now it's time for the debrief. In the military, every time you finish an exercise or an operation, you do a debrief, which is where you get your team together and you talk about the things that you did well, things you did poorly. It's basically a way for everyone on the team to have an input as to ways you can improve for next time and you don't make the same mistakes again. Before I do that, though, I'd like to start off by giving a shout out to Woodcraft Magazine, not only for the excellent article, but when I had an issue trying to locate the finials to complete the project, I reached out to them on Facebook and they responded to my message almost immediately. So thank you very much, Woodcraft. First point, and that goes into the finials, when I didn't know where to buy them, you need to know your timeline and schedule and plan accordingly for completing a project. So I wanted to have this done for Valentine's Day, which is February 14th. I ordered the finial from the States, I think it was Seattle, around January 25th, January 26th. They entered into Canada on February 3rd, and then I didn't get the finials arrived to my home till February 16th, which is after Valentine's Day. So I apologize to my stepdaughter Olivia, my wife Christy, and thank you very much, Canada Post. Appreciate that. Okay, next point. This is more the videography aspect of it. Plan the shots so the viewer can see what's happening. I know you know what I'm talking about, especially at the drill press. My elbow was in the way a lot, and you couldn't see what was happening. So there's no point in making a video if the viewer can't see what's going on. Next point, have a clean and uncluttered workspace. At the table saw, when I was cutting the strips, at the start I had the pile of strips there and my elbow nudged them and they had a little bit of a topple. And had I chose to react a little bit differently and reach for them, maybe my hand would have gone the way of the table saw blade and I could have been injured. So make sure you have a clean and uncluttered workspace. I should have known better on that one. Next, read the instructions for all materials before you start, and this goes to the aniline dye. I went to go dye the wood at nighttime inside the home because my shop's not heated, and I read the instructions for the dye, and of course it told me that which I should have known from watching cutting board videos, before you dye the wood you need to get it wet. So you'll raise the grain, that way you can sand it and then dye so you'll have a better finish. So that cost me, an overnight. I couldn't dye it till the next day. Small mistake, but still was a mistake. Next, safety equipment. Even though I came into this project having used my table saw quite a bit and coming into it with a healthy fear about table saws and table saw safety, I still, when I was watching the videos I took, I was finding myself cringing quite a bit at how close my fingers were getting to the saw blade, and I was lucky that nothing happened, and I think a lot of you feel that way. But anyway, the next day I went out to my local Lee Valley Tools and I bought myself a gripper push block, so I'll be putting that together and using that for future projects because I only have 10 fingers and I want to keep it that way. So also Lee Valley supports the military. I know in Canada they give a military a 10% discount and veterans a 10% discount. I'm not sure if you have Lee Valley in the States, but if they do, I'm sure they do for you as well. Next, finally, I'd like to say just a shout out to my nephews Eli and Owen. I know you're watching this video, so hopefully you enjoyed it and you can come out here and visit your Uncle Dandu some point and do some woodworking with me. That's all I have. If you want, my stepdaughter Olivia told me not to tell you to subscribe because people don't like being told what to do, so great idea. She's a smart little cookie. If you want to, please subscribe. I do plan on putting out some future videos, and if you want to, you can like it, or I guess you could dislike it, but I hope you don't. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.